This morning, you will hear two speeches, one by Frederick Douglass and one by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with each speech being followed by a response. As you listen to the words of these great leaders, consider the time in which these words were originally spoken. Consider their meaning and how they are still relevant today. Good morning. Our program will begin in 10 minutes. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. This morning, you will hear 2 speeches, one by Frederick Douglass and one by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with each speech being followed by a response. As you listen to the words of these great leaders, consider the time in which these words were originally spoken. Consider their meaning and how they are still relevant today. Thank you for joining us this morning. The program will begin in 2 minutes.
And I think the realistic fact is they want to be people. They want to be men. They want equality, period. It just boils down to that. We still have a long, long way to go. I still have faith in the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your Akron Urban League's annual Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Breakfast. On behalf of the Akron Urban League's board and staff, we are grateful that each of you were willing to sign in and join us this morning in celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. King, whose dream was one of equity and equality for all people. One of the things Dr. King stated back in 1962 sticks out to me. I do believe there is a difference between saying something and doing something. These words remain both wise and provocative as we strive to make a more diverse, welcoming, and inclusive community. We need to act, not just discuss. And we also need to make room in our thoughts, hearts, and values for the life, legacy, and hopes that Dr. King stood for. My hope for all of us during this upcoming year is that we take meaningful action and make room. Because of the pandemic, Martin Luther King Day will look different again this year. We are not meeting together, but we can still reflect and celebrate. We can still explore the day's meanings, examine the state of our nation, and decide how we move forward together. I was reminded of this as I attended other MLK events. My role was appropriately minor, to listen and learn. In doing so, I was reminded of how far we still have to climb as a community. But I was also inspired to see how much talent and energy we have here in the community and at the Akron Urban League working for the cause of racial justice. We still live in tumultuous times, but ultimately, I believe that the commotion we see all around us is evidence of bad and hurtful things dying rather than thriving. And ultimately, I trust in our ability to act and change the world. I am Alan Rothenbuecker, Chair of the Board of Directors for the Akron Urban League. I am honored to be talking to you again this year on this extremely important day. The Akron Urban League, along with the leaders of the community, accept the challenge to continue the work of Dr. King's great legacy. We would not be here today if it were not for the many contributions of our generous sponsors who are listed here. We owe a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, the Synthomer Foundation. Let's hear from them now.
Good morning. I'm Teresa Carter, president of the Synthomer Foundation. And on behalf of all of us at Synthomer, we are absolutely delighted to once again be a sponsor of the Akron Urban League's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Day celebration, honoring this incredible civil rights giant whose legacy continues to inspire and encourage us to never give up the courageous fight for respect, equity, and inclusion for people of color. And as we reflect today on Dr. King's life's journey, it is my hope that we will walk away with a renewed sense of purpose that will generate excitement around our collective efforts to not just talk about change, but to actually make it happen. Thank you to the Akron Urban League for your service and fantastic work you do in our community. And I hope that each of us here today will continue to do our part in helping to support the mission of this great organization. Now, speaking of service, I'd like to leave you with one of Dr. King's notable quotes, and it reads, "Not everybody can be famous, but everybody can be great, because greatness is determined by service. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love," end quote. So my challenge for all of us here today is, let's be great. Thank you.
The Akron Urban League also benefits from the support of our elected officials, and we are grateful that County Executive Eileen Shapiro could be part of this event.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us to celebrate and recognize the life, the work, and the lasting legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A special thank you to Teresa LeGuerre and the Akron Urban League for hosting this event and for their steadfast commitment to the work and the vision of Dr. King. Dr. King is undoubtedly one of the most influential figures of our nation's history. Called by a higher power, he spoke truth to power and inspired Black Americans and others from all walks of life to demand equality, no matter the color of their skin. Taken from us far too early, his words and his mission continue to resonate across this land each and every day. And while we still look to his words and his teachings to guide us, we have not yet achieved his dream. Yes, we have made some progress, but there still is so much more to do to lift all people, to create a just and equitable and accepting nation and community. I know there are many of us participating today that are committed to doing just that. And working together, we will create a nation of communities where freedom rings for all people. I wish you all good health and good fortune in the new year. Thank you.
Today, we continue the Akron Urban League's tradition of honoring Dr. King and striving to build upon his legacy. Our theme today is Our Legacy Matters, envisioning the future through lessons of the past. Before we get to the heart of our program, we're going to take a 2-minute break for all of you to get breakfast or a second cup of coffee. But first, let's join together and sing verse 1 of Lift Every Voice and Sing, led by Jaron LeGrare, which will be followed by Shalita Smith, President-elect for the Akron Urban League Young Professionals, giving our invocation.
Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Good morning. My name is Shalita Smith, President of the Akron Urban League Young Professionals. I am honored to deliver today's invocation for the Akron Urban League Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. annual breakfast. Let's bow our heads. Father, we thank you for this gracious occasion where we can gather together in unity. We thank you for the opportunity to serve the community and support the great mission of the Akron Urban League. May we live out the legacy of Dr. King with boldness, truth, and love. Strengthen us to withstand anything and face everything with wisdom and grace to transform this region. Now, Father, bless this time together that it may nourish us to continue in this movement. We ask this in your name. Amen.
realistic fact is they want to be people. They want to be men. They want equality, period. It just boils down to that. We still have a long, long way to go. I still have faith in the future.
A very limited statement of the argument for impartial suffrage and for including the Negro in the body politic would require more space than can reasonably be asked here. It is supported by the reason as broad as the nature of man and as numerous as the wants of society. Man is the only government-making animal in the world. His right to participate in the production and operation of government is an inference from his nature as direct and self-evident as his right to acquire property or education. It is no less a crime against the manhood of a man to declare that he shall not share in the making and directing of the government under which he lives, than to say that he shall not acquire property and education. The fundamental and unanswerable argument in the favor of the enfranchisement of the Negro is found in the undisputed fact of his manhood. He is a man, and by every fact and argument by which any man can sustain the right to vote, the Negro can sustain his right equally. It is plain that if the right belongs to any, it belongs to all. The doctrine that some men have no rights, the others are bound to respect. It is a doctrine which we must banish, as we have banished slavery from which it emanated. If black men have no right in the eyes of white men, of course, the whites have none in the eyes of the blacks. The result is a war of races and an annihilation of all proper human relations. It is true that a strong plea for equal suffrage might be addressed to the national sense of honor. Something, too, might be said of national gratitude. A nation might well hesitate before the temptation to betray its allies. There is something immeasurably mean to say nothing of the cruelty in placing the loyal Negro of the South under the political power of their rebel masters. To make peace with our enemies is all well enough, but to prefer our enemies and sacrifice our friends, to exalt our enemies and cast down our friends, to clothe our enemies who sought the destruction of the government with all political power and leave our friends powerless in their hands is an act which need not be characterized here. We ask the Negro to espouse our cause, to be our friends, to fight for us and against their masters. And now, after they have done all that we've asked them to do, help us to conquer their masters and thereby direct it toward themselves the furious hate of the vanquished. It is proposed in some quarters to turn them over to the political control of the common enemy of the government and the Negro. But of this, let nothing be said in this place. Waiving humanity, national honor, the claims of gratitude, the precious satisfaction arising from the deeds of charity and justice of the weak and defenselessness. The appeal for impartial suffrage addresses itself with great pertinency to the darkest, coldest, and flintiest side of the human heart, and would wring righteousness from the unfailing calculations of human selfishness. Strong as we are, we need the energy that slumbers in the black man's arm to make us stronger. We want no longer any heavy-footed, melancholy service from the Negro. We want the cheerful activity of the quickened manhood for these sable millions. Nor can we afford to endure the moral blight which the existence of the degraded and hated class must necessarily inflict upon any people among who such a class may exist. Exclude the Negro as a class from political rights. Teach them that the high and mainly privilege of suffrage is to be enjoyed by white citizens only, that they may bear the burden of the state, but they are not to have no part in its direction or its honors. And you at once deprives them of one of the main incentives to manly character and patriotic devotion to the interests of the government. In a word, you stamp them as a degraded caste. You teach them to despise themselves and all others to despise them. Men are so constituted that they are largely deprived their ideas of their abilities and their possibilities from settled judgment from their fellow men, and especially from such as they read in the institutions under which they live. If these bless them, then they are blessed indeed. If these blast them, then they are blasted indeed. Give the Negro the elective franchise, and you give him at once a powerful motive for a noble exertion, and make him a man among men. A character is demanded of him, and here as elsewhere demanded favor supply. It is nothing against this reasoning that all men who vote are not good men or good citizens. It is enough that the possession and exercise of the elective franchise is in itself an appeal to the nobler elements of manhood and imposes education as essential to the safety of society. To appreciate the full force of this argument, it must be observed that disenfranchisement in the Republican government, based upon the idea of human equality and universal suffrage, is a very different thing from disenfranchisement in government based upon the idea of the divine right kings, or the entire subjugation of the masses. Masses of men can take care of themselves, but in a country like ours, where men of all nations, kindreds, and tongues are freely enfranchised and allowed to vote, to say to the Negro, "You shall not vote," is to deal his manhood a staggering blow, and to burn into his soul a bitter and goading sense of wrong, or else work in him a stupid indifference to all the elements of a manly character. As a nation, we cannot afford to have among us either this indifference and stupidity, or that burning sense of wrong. These sable millions are too powerful to be allowed to remain either indifferent or discontented. Enfranchise them, and they become self-respecting and country-loving citizens. Disenfranchise them, and the mark of Cain is set upon them less mercifully than upon the first murderer, for no man who was to hurt him. But this mark of inferiority, all the more palpable because of the difference of color, not only dooms the Negro to be a vagabond, but makes him the prey of insult and outrage everywhere. While nothing may be urged here as the past services of the Negro, it is quite within the line of its appeal to remind the nation of the possibilities that a time may come when the services of the Negro may be a second time required. History is said to repeat itself, and if so, having wanted the Negro once, we may want him again. Can that statesmanship be wise which we would leave the Negro good ground to hesitate when the exigencies of the country require his prompt assistance? Can that be sound statesmanship which leave millions of men in the gloomy discontent and possibly in a state of alienation in the day of the national trouble? Was not the nation stronger when 200,000 sable soldiers were hurled against the rebel fortifications than it would have been without them? Arming the Negro was an urgent military necessity 3 years ago. Are we sure that another quite as pressing may not await us? Casting aside all thoughts of justice and magnanimity, It is wise to impose upon the Negro all the burden involved in sustaining government against foes within and foes without, to make him equal sharer in all sacrifices for the public good, to tax him in peace and conscript him in war, and then coldly exclude him from the ballot box. What then is the work before Congress? Is it to save the people from the South, from themselves and the nation, from detriment on their account? Congress must supplant the evident sectional tendencies of the South by national disposition and tendencies. It must cause national ideas and object to take the lead and control the politics of those states. It must cease to recognize the old slave masters as the competent persons to rule the South. In a word, it must enfranchise the Negro, and by means of loyal Negroes and the loyal white men of the South, build up a national party there, and in time bridge the chasm between North and South, so that our country may have a common liberty and a common civilization. The new wine must be put into new bottles. The lamb may be not trusted with the wolf. Loyalty is hardly safe with traitors. Statesmen of America, beware what you do. The plowshare of rebellion has gone through the land being deep. The soil is in readiness and the seed time has come. Nation, not less than individuals, reap as they sow. The dreadful calamities of the past few years has not come by accident nor unbidden from the ground. You shudder today at the harvest of blood sown in the springtime of the Republic by your patriot father. The principle of slavery which they tolerated under the erroneous impression that it would soon die out became at least the dominant principle and power at the South. It early mastered the Constitution, became superior to the Union, and enthroned itself above the law. Freedom of speech and of the press, it slowly but successfully banished from the South, dictated its own code of honor and manners to the nation, brandished the bludgeoned and bowie knifed over constitutional debate, sapped the foundations of loyalty, dried up the springs of patriotism, blotted out the testimonies of the fathers against oppression, padlocked the pulpit, exalted liberty from its literature, invented nonsensical theories about master races and slave races of men, and in due season produced a rebellion fierce, foul, and bloody. This evil principle again seeks admission into our body politic. It comes now in shape of denial of political rights to 4 million loyal colored people. The South does not ask for slavery. It only asks for large degraded castes which shall have no political rights. This is the case. Statesmen, beware what you do. The destiny of unborn and unnumbered generations is in your hands. Will you repeat the mistake of your fathers who sinned ignorantly? Or will you profit by the blood-bought wisdom all around you and forever expel every vestige? As you, members of the 39th Congress, decide, will the country be peaceful, united, and happy, or troubled, divided, and miserable? Thank you.
In the appeal to Congress, Frederick Douglass appealed to his fellow statesmen to go beyond their service to the generation before them, in challenging them to consider the impact of their actions on future generations. He said, "Statesmen, beware what you do. The destiny of the unborn and unnumbered generations is in your hands." Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist, a writer, a gifted orator, and an original American thinker, gifted in the art of persuasion and courageously willing to leverage his power and influence to focus on the wider neglected truths. He was keenly aware that America's change agents were unable to see and address the needs of all citizens, especially those forgotten, those enslaved, as leaders engaged in the construction of a free and fair society. Douglass was wholly committed to expanding the participation of all people into the blessings of freedom. He was a realist. He was aware that many good people were lacking in both experience and knowledge about how to go beyond the roadblocks to freedom. Douglass devoted his life to removing those roadblocks. In doing so, he understood the necessity of an unconditional commitment to engaging in uncomfortable but necessary conversations. Douglass was recognized by many as the most important Black American leader of the 19th century. In his familiar appeal to Congress, that appeal for suffrage that we just experienced, that refrain is familiar and is relevant today, many of the points. I'll put them in more plain words. To grant the rights of Black men is the fact of his manhood. African Americans, he said, aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They just want to be treated equally. African Americans do not wish for revenge. If rights and privileges are granted, people will act and become self-respecting, country-loving citizens, was a part of that message. There was great symbolism, vision, and insight, and an opportunity for education within the words of Frederick Douglass. Here are the best of what I hear in his words. One, it's a crime that everyone can't share in making and directing the government under which we live. In the rights of all should be the rights of every individual, and any ideas otherwise should be banished away. About voting, he said, to give Blacks in the US the right to vote and thrive would cause the nation to thrive. I also hear through his words to say that a Black man can't vote is to burn into his soul a bitterness and a sense of being wronged that again will yield itself for many years to come. The South resist in that sense because they feel they can rely on the Democratic support in the North, was a part of that speech. Or what I would say today, persons who are prohibiting persons from exercising their rights depend on the silence and indifference of others. What did Frederick Douglass ask Congress to do in that speech? Eliminate bias. He talked about the sectional tendencies and to replace them with national tendencies, again, representing everyone. He asked them to destroy ideas, the idea that old slave masters are the only ones to guide the post-war South, not allowing for the participation of others. He asked them to do something before free speech is banished down and it dictates its own code of honors and manners that the rest of the nation have to deal with that might cause damage. In essence, he urged Congress to act. Members of the Akron community, throughout our nation and in our community, the struggle for equity, for social justice, for all Americans continues. And the need and the opportunity is still before us to ensure equity, inclusion, and opportunity for all. Akron is special, not perfect. Having lived and worked in several communities, we are really special. This is an open community, a diverse community, a connected community. We have many assets. We've embraced the journey of what needs to be done. Being truthful, well, we could also benefit, though, from a greater sense of urgency and expectation. In my neck of the woods, in the Akron Public Schools, we are establishing a vision of excellence through equity. This vision will serve as our guide in ensuring that equitable opportunities and practice are woven throughout all of the experiences in our district. In essence, the Akron Public Schools believes in the unique potential of all of our scholars, regardless of race, class, socioeconomics, gender, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, cognitive, physical ability, diverse language, fluency, or religion. We believe in the power and potential and collective efforts of everyone supporting students to dream, persist, and thrive. We are committed to identifying and eliminating inequities and ensuring expectations that are evidenced and supported throughout our environment. APS has many strengths and has made great progress, but just like we learned from Frederick Douglass, we anticipate moments of discomfort and opportunities ahead for truthful dialogue. I would like to leave you with a quote from historian John Stauffer, who in his book, Giants, the author wrote about Frederick Douglass during the dedication of the Freedom's Monument that depicts Abraham Lincoln's outstretched hand upon a kneeling slave. He writes, Frederick Douglass did not like that monument. Douglass would have preferred something less paternalistic in terms of an image of a slave kneeling before his white redeemer. The biographer went on to say that Douglass knew when making that statement about that monument that he would make some people uncomfortable. Frederick Douglass understood the fact that truth makes some people uncomfortable. Yet history reminds us that discomfort is often the beginning of great strides forward. We have much to learn from and to emulate from the life of Frederick Douglass. He was not afraid of being an agent of responsible discomfort. He was committed to a life of authenticity, and we, the descendants of his bravery and balance, owe him a debt of gratitude. Just as he did through his famous speech, we as leaders in our community and throughout our circles of influence can benefit as well from ensuring that open and honest dialogue are occurring, even when it is accompanied by uncomfortable but respectful conversations. Our community and nation would benefit from the responsible ways Frederick Douglass called attention to neglected truths. In his memory, I encourage each of us to consider how we are using our gifts to illuminate and act on neglected truths in ways that address the needs of all citizens, especially those struggling to have their basic needs met. We must start by ensuring the right to vote and participate continues to be something that we are deeply committed to, and it's an obligation before us all. Remember the words of Frederick Douglass as we continue our work in ensuring a more fair and just society for all. Statesmen, beware what you do. The destiny of the unborn generations is in your hands. His words are even more relevant today. Akron family, we must think not just of the people we serve and the state of our community today, but again, we must think of and work for generations of unborn citizens who will be affected by our decisions, our action, or our inaction. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished platform associates, fellow Americans. 3 years ago, the Supreme Court of this nation rendered in simple, eloquent, and unequivocal language a decision which will long be stenciled on the mental sheets of succeeding generations. For all men of goodwill, This May 17th decision came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of human captivity. It came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of disinherited people throughout the world who had dared only to dream of freedom. Unfortunately, this noble and sublime decision has not gone without opposition. This opposition has often risen to ominous proportions. Many states have risen up in open defiance. This legislative hall of South ring loud with such words as interposition and nullification. But even more, all types of conniving methods are still being used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters. The denial of this sacred right is as a tragic betrayal of the highest mandates to our democratic tradition. And so, our most urgent request to the President of the United States and to every member of Congress is to give us the right to vote. Give us the ballot. And we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot. And we will no longer plead to the federal government for passage of anti-lynching law. We will, by the power of our vote, write the law on the statute books of the South and bring an end to the dastardly acts of the hooded perpetrators of violence. Give us the ballot, and we will transform the salient misdeeds of bloodthirsty mobs into the calculated good deeds of orderly citizens. Give us the ballot, and we will fill our legislative halls with men of goodwill and send to the sacred halls of Congress men who will not sign a Southern manifesto because of their devotion to the manifesto of justice. Give us the ballot. And we will place judges on the benches of the South who will do justly and love mercy. And we will place at the head of Southern states governors who have felt not only the tang of the human, but the glow of the divine. Give us the ballot. And we will quietly and non-violently, without rancor or bitterness, implement the Supreme Court's decision of May 17th, 1954. In this juncture of our nation's history, there is an urgent need for dedicated and courageous leadership if we are to solve the problems ahead and make racial justice a reality. This leadership must be fourfold. First, there is a need for strong, aggressive leadership from the federal government. So far, only the judicial branch of the government has evinced this quality of leadership. If the executive and legislative branches of the government were as concerned about the protection of our citizenship rights as the federal courts have been, then the transition from a segregated to an integrated society would be infinitely smoother. But we so often look to Washington in vain for this concern. In the midst of the tragic breakdown of law and order, the executive branch of the government is all too silent and apathetic. In the midst of desperate need for civil rights legislation, the legislative branch of the government is all too stagnant and hypocritical. In the midst of these prevailing conditions, we come to Washington today pleading with the President and members of Congress to provide a strong, moral, and courageous leadership for a situation that cannot permanently be evaded. We come humbly to say to the men in the forefront of our government that the civil rights issue is not an ephemeral, evanescent domestic issue that can be kicked about by reactionary guardians of the status quo. It is rather an eternal moral issue which may well determine the destiny of our nation in the ideological struggle with communism. The hour is late. The clock of destiny is ticking out. We must act now before it is too late. A second area in which there is need for strong leadership is from the white northern liberals. There is a dire need today for a liberalism which is truly liberal. What we are witnessing today in so many northern communities is a sort of quasi-liberalism, which is based on the principle of looking sympathetically at all sides. It is a liberalism so bent on seeing all sides that it fails to become committed to either side. It is a liberalism that is so objectively analytic that it is not subjectively committed. It is a liberalism which is neither hot nor cold but lukewarm. We call for a liberalism from the North which will be thoroughly committed to the ideal of racial justice and will not be deterred by the propaganda and subtle words of those who say, slow up for a while. You're pushing too fast. A third source that we must look for strong leadership is from moderates of the white South. It is unfortunate that at this time the leadership of the white South stems from the closed-minded reactionaries. These persons gain prominence and power by the dissemination of false ideas and by deliberately appealing to the deepest hate responses within the human mind. It is my firm belief that this closed-minded, reactionary, recalcitrant group constitutes a numerical minority. There are in the white South more open-minded moderates than appears on the surface. These persons are silent today because of fear of a social, political, and economical reprisal. God grant that the white moderates of the South will rise up courageously without fear and take up the leadership in this tense period of transition. I cannot close without stressing the urgent need for strong, courageous, and intelligent leadership from the Negro community. We need a leadership that is 1957 calm and yet positive. There is no day for the rabble-rouser, whether he be Negro or white. We must realize that we are grappling with the most weighty social problem of this nation, and in grappling with such a complex problem, there is no place for misguided emotionalism. We must work passionately and unrelentingly for the goal of freedom, but we must be sure that our hands are clean in the struggle. We must never struggle with falsehood, hate, or malice. We must never become bitter. I know how we feel sometimes. There is the danger that those of us who have been forced for so long to stand amid the tragic midnight of oppression, those of us who have been trampled over, those of us who have been kicked about, there is the danger that we will become bitter. But if we will become bitter and indulge in the campaign, the old, the new order, which is emerging, will be nothing but a duplication of the old order. We must meet hate with love. We must meet physical force with soul force. There is still a voice crying out through the vista of time, saying, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. Then, and only then, can you matriculate into the university of eternal life. That same voice cries out in terms lifted to cosmic proportions. He who lives by the sword will perish by the sword. And history is replete with the bleached bones of nations that failed to follow this command. We must follow nonviolence and love now. I'm not talking about a sentimental, shallow kind of love. I'm not talking about eros, which is a sort of aesthetic romantic love. I'm not even talking about philia, which is a sort of intimate affection between personal friends, but I'm talking about agape. I'm talking about the love of God in the hearts of men. I'm talking about a type of love which will cause you to love the person who does the evil deed while hating the deed that the person does. We've got to love. There is another warning signal. We talk about a great deal of our rights, and rightly so. We proudly proclaim that 3/4 of the people of the world are colored. We have the privilege of noticing in our generation the great drama of freedom and independence as it unfolds in Asia and Africa. All of these things are in line with the unfolding work of providence. But we must be sure that we accept them in the right spirit. We must not seek to use our emerging freedom and our growing power to do the same thing to the white minority that has been done to us for so many centuries. Our aim must never be to defeat or humiliate the white man. We must not become victimized with the philosophy of black supremacy. God is not interested in merely freeing black men and brown men and yellow men, but God is interested in freeing the whole human race. We must work with determination to create a society, yes, not where black men are superior and other men are inferior and vice versa, but a society in which all men live together as brothers and respect the dignity and worth of human personality. We must also avoid the temptation of being victimized with the psychology of victors. We have won marvelous victories. Through the work of the NAACP, we have been able to do some of the most amazing things of this generation. And I come this afternoon with nothing but praise for this great organization, for the work that it has already done and the work that it will do in the future. And although they're outlawed in Alabama and other states, the fact still remains that this organization has done more to achieve civil rights for Negroes than any other organization we can point to. Certainly, this is fine. But we must not, however, remain satisfied with the court victory over our white brothers. We must respond to every decision with an understanding of those who have opposed us and with an appreciation of the difficult adjustments that the court orders pose for them. We must act in such a way as to make possible a coming together of white people and colored people on the basis of a real harmony of interest and understanding. We must seek an integration based on mutual respect. I conclude by saying that each of us must keep faith in the future. Let us not despair. Let us realize as we struggle for justice and freedom, we have cosmic companionship. Go out with that faith today. Go back to your homes in the Southland to that faith with that faith today. Go back to Philadelphia, to New York, to 1957 Detroit and Chicago with that faith today. That the universe is on our side in the struggle. Stand up for justice. Sometimes it gets hard, but it is always difficult to get out of Egypt. For the Red Sea always stands before you with discouraging dimensions. Yes, and even after you've crossed the Red Sea, you have to move through a wilderness with prodigious hilltops of evil, yes, and gigantic mountains of opposition. But I say to you this afternoon, keep moving. Let nothing slow you up. Move on with dignity and honor and respectability. I realize that it will cause restless nights sometime. It might cause losing a job. It will cause suffering and sacrifice. It might even cause some physical death for some. But if physical death is the price that some must pay to free their children from a permanent life of psychological death, then nothing can be more Christian. Keep going today. Keep moving amid every mountain of opposition. If you do that with dignity, when the history books are written in the future, the historians will have to look back and say, there lived a great people, a people with fleecy looks and black complexion, but a people who injected new meaning into the veins of civilization, a people which stood up with dignity and honor and saved Western civilization in her darkest hour, a people that gave new integrity and new dimension of love to civilization. When that happens, the morning stars will sing together and the sons of God will shout for joy.
Thank you for the opportunity to share my reflections, my thoughts on the speech, because Dr. King was more than just, I have a dream. He was so strong, so full of energy and knowledge and depth that we don't give him enough credit. This was written in 1957, and 1957, which happened to be the year I was born, calculated on your own. But when you think about the time, during that time period, they were really fighting for the right to vote. He was actually trying to encourage America, we seem like we're always doing that, encourage America to live up to the promises that it made. Whether it's in the Emancipation Proclamation or whether it's in the voting rights, Brown versus Board of Education, whatever, we're always encouraging our country to live up to its dreams. And so during that time period, you could feel the frustration of the individuals in the room. You could feel the excitement about wanting more for everyone. And that's the key for everyone. So I think for me, my reflection really is about during that time period to be able to come so far and think you're so far to only be stifled again by saying, oh, but you can't vote, oh, but you can't. Those words tend to be the catalyst sometimes to get us to move forward and do things in a different way. I am always reminded too that Dr. King and the NAACP, they shared so many same goals and visions. The NAACP also fought for the educational, for the social, for the voting rights of everyone. And so that's why I think it was so easy for us to make so much headway together. Dr. King's movement, NAACP, and others working together on a common goal. Dr. King's ballot speech kind of reminds us all that we're not as far along as we thought we were. It's a reminder that we have to continue to work together to move the needle and keep it moving in the right direction. I think we've lost the zeal of the 1957s. I think we've lost that, okay, there I go with the hands. We've lost that, that oomph because we're not all fighting for one particular goal. We already have the right to vote. Now what we have to do is to remind everyone we have this right, and how do you use that right to magnify the good for all. This is one piece of a puzzle, but if we lose this piece of the puzzle, it could set us back eons. And I think that for me is the frustrating part. In 1950, we saw the visible scars of lynching, the visible scars of people being hosed, the attacks of the dogs. We saw those things. Today, they're more emotional scars. They're emotional scars, they're social scars, they're educational scars. Now, how do we help people? Because you don't see it like some people feel it. And it's not one united goal. So I think for most of us who are still in this fight for voting rights and some of the other civil rights, you look around and you feel like, oh, we've all, kumbaya, we've all come along, and no, we haven't. The playing field still isn't equal. People still don't have the same opportunities. Or we would not still have a George Floyd situation. Or we would not have to talk about diversity and equity. Or we would not have to have a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day to remind people that we have a lot to do. I think as a community, we have to keep history alive. So often I hear young people say, oh, that happened in the past. It's not like that today. No, it isn't like that today, but it's a different attack on your rights, attack on your being, attack on your growth and development as a human being in this country, especially for African Americans. I loved at the end of the speech, and I've got to read it. It says, I realize that this will cause restless nights for some. It may cause losing a job. It will cause suffering and sacrifice. It might even cause physical death. But if physical death is the price that some must pay to free their children from a permanent life of psychological death, then nothing could be more Christian. And then at the end he says, keep going today, keep moving amid every obstacle. If we will do that with dignity, when the history books are written in the future, the historians will have to look back and say, there lived a great people. I don't think we need to even think beyond those words. If we as Americans, as African Americans, as Akronites, want to continue this country as it moves forward, and we want to leave a legacy that says we were a great people, I don't want us to talk the talk anymore. I want us to start walking the walk. We know what needs to be done. We just got to do it. Do we believe it enough? There's an African proverb that says, tomorrow belongs to people who prepare for it today. Are we willing to really prepare? Are we willing to really get it done? But one of my favorite ones, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So therefore, as African Americans, I think Dr. King was sending us a message. We've got to be our own historians. We've got to change the narrative, write the story, and create a new focus for those who come after us. A. Philip Randolph said, freedom is never, ever given. It is always won.
The Akron Urban League has stood the test of time. For 96 years, it has been both a bridge over troubled water and an ever-present beacon of light for blacks and underserved residents of Summit County. In the early 1920s, the social and employment needs of the growing black population in Akron were glaringly apparent. In 1925, with support from the CEOs of the YMCA and major corporations that included the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, and Babcock's Publishing Company, the Association for Colored Community Work was established. In its early decades of service, the association was instrumental in helping blacks weather the Great Recession, battle discrimination, and secure jobs. In 1950, the Akron Community Service Center was built to offer expanded services. The center pulsated with a host of vibrant social gatherings and recreational programs at a time when no other facilities in Akron would allow blacks through their doors. For many, the Akron Community Service Center was a formative force in their childhoods. Today, the Akron Urban League continues to be a champion for the black community and underserved. Aligned with the National Urban League priorities, but with services adapted to the unique needs of the community, the Akron Urban League strives to achieve racial equality in the spheres of economics, education, health, and social justice. Each year, it impacts more than 5,000 individuals. Workforce development programs provide career assessment, job preparation, employment, case management, and supportive services to young adults and adults. College scholarships are awarded annually to qualifying students. The Akron Urban League's Minority Business Assistance Center works to support entrepreneurs and small minority-owned and disadvantaged businesses. In addition to these vital services, the Akron Urban League continues to be a social and civic hub of the community. Annual events bring together a standing room-only audience to reflect upon civil rights and recommit to a future of racial equity and social justice. Workshops, leadership forums, and civic engagement activities are also offered throughout the year. Throughout its 96-year history, the Akron Urban League has been on the front lines of civil rights. Standing on the shoulders of leaders like Frederick Douglass and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Akron Urban League has not only taken the words of these great leaders and put them into action, but they work tirelessly to make sure these lessons are not forgotten. The fight for equality and equity within our community has been hard fought and unfortunately is not over. The struggles faced during the times of Douglass and Dr. King were strenuous. They were necessary. They were important, and they are not over. We continue to fight injustice, racism, and bigotry by constantly showing up, by using our voices to be a part of the solution, by working together with the greater Akron community to create opportunities for its citizens, and by maintaining our presence as a beacon of light for blacks and underserved residents of Summit County.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
And I think the realistic fact is they want to be people. They want to be men. They want equality, period. It just boils down to that. We still have a long, long way to go. I still have faith in the future.
I want to share with you the words of American poet Amanda Gorman, who wrote the following. May this be the day we come together. Mourning, we come to mend. Withered, we come to weather. Torn, we come to tend. Battered, we come to better. Tethered by this year of yearning, we are learning that though we weren't ready for this, we have been readied by it. We steadily vow that no matter how we are weighed down, we must always pave a way forward. This hope is our door, our portal. Even if we never get back to normal, someday we can venture beyond it. To leave the known and take the first steps, so let us not return to what was normal, but reach towards what is next. Through the words of historians and poets like Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr., and Amanda Gorman, we can see and understand that while we have made many strides towards the equity and equality they envisioned, we still have a long way to go. But we must do this together. As a community, we must continue to move the needle forward by working together and creating a space where equity and equality are not just ideals we strive for, but a constant thread throughout our families, businesses, and the larger community. The Akron Urban League has been supporting and working in the greater Akron area for more than 96 years, and we are just getting started. We look forward to the new year and to the steps we will take together. Thank you so much for your support, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.